Welcome to this week's episode of Talkin Folk. This is Nick, and I've got a special guest on today's show. I've got Dave Hause. How's it going, Dave? Thanks for joining us.
It's going well. Thanks so much for having me, man.
Yeah, well, we were just catching up, and it's funny getting you on the show. Your team reached out and you're like, hey, Dave's got a new album coming out, and I was like, oh, Dave from the Loved Ones and the Falcon and all that. How does that fit on a folk show? Which is probably what our audience is thinking. But lo and behold, you've got a couple releases that you've done now that are more in our folk kind of genre that we cover, and obviously today we're going to talk about your next LP. So really looking forward to it. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, awesome. So a little bit about yourself. So before we hop into the new LP that's coming out, what have you been up to the last year? I know it's been tough. Like I saw that a tour kind of got canceled in the last month or so, postponed. Has it been sitting and working with your brother as one of your songwriting collaborators, as far as I know, working through writing and all that, or how's it been?
It's been a real blessing to me, honestly. I think, thankfully, I've heard other people say this, so I'm not the first person to say that the slowing down of the world and the pandemic, having a positive silver lining. I'm not the first person to say that, but I think that I just would have never taken this big of a break and been home this long. And my wife and I have twin toddlers. So they're 2.5 years old. And so I basically watched them turn from 1 to 2.5 and have been home for that time and been really dedicated to that and really focused on that. And that's just been wonderful. Despite obviously the pressure of the pandemic and the difficulties in the world and stuff. But professionally, I guess I've spent that time working with my brother. We put out a double EP at the end of last year, and that was covering Patty Costello, who's one of the songwriters in Dillinger 4, an old punk band. And the other side of the other EP was covering Patty Griffin, who your listeners might be more familiar with. She's a famous singer-songwriter. It was just a project that I always thought would be fun. It just happens to be that two of my favorite songwriters from totally different genres are both named Patty. So it was a cute hook, I guess. But I did find in starting to cover both of them, I sort of just did it as a way to pass the time and to really like kind of study two of my favorite songwriters and what I loved about both of them. And found a lot of parallels in their simplicity, their poignancy and emotional weight, how they approached lyrics. And it just ended up being this really bizarre, fun thing. The other master it sort of served was trying to put something out ourselves on our own label with the help of Sony's distribution arm. And so we wanted to try that before we went ahead and did that for our own like full length new, studio album kind of thing. So that's how we spent the middle of last year and then going into the fall. Yeah, we did have a bunch of tour stuff cancel, but once it became clear it was going to be a while, I just said to my manager, like, please take it all off the books. Like, if you want to make plans, go ahead and make them, but I don't want to know about it. I'm just going to commit myself to having no plans. And I think that was sort of spiritually good for me, to kind of think like, you're going to be home for the foreseeable future. And how would you like to spend your time? And that led into, at the beginning of this year, we put out that LP. We put each EP on either side of a vinyl and released them. And thankfully there was interest from press and stuff on the project, and people seemed to like it. And it really ironed our resolve to try our own label, because it worked. We were able to get it to the people that wanted it. And you could see how that helped us financially to be, the ones that invested in it and then reap the rewards. So we decided, my manager, my brother and I, that we would do that for the next studio record. And I think like everybody, we came into 2021 thinking, well, by the end of the year, we might be able to work again. So my brother and I decided to get disciplined in songwriting. We had tons of ideas, little lyric snippets and melody snippets in our phones and just ideas that we had kicked around. But I said, hey, let's get disciplined. And it was almost like a resolution, like a New Year's resolution. Like we got into the first 3 days or something of the year and we were like, come on, let's buckle down. And we tried this new thing. It was called Pencils Down Friday. And the idea was You're
going to trademark that?
Actually, one of the items on the pre-order of the new record, like for the deluxe bundle, is a notebook that says Dave Hause Pencils Down Friday. It's a little notebook for the fans to write down their ideas and stuff. But the idea was that we would meet on Monday and decide what we were going to each work on, and we would work together on those things and independently throughout the week. But the idea was we had to keep each other accountable. By Friday, you have to sing something for the other.
There you go.
And it doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to be something that, you're going to play for Taylor Swift, but it has to be something that's somewhat complete in that, if you were to talk to a regular person who doesn't do this for a living and they said, oh, you write songs? What was the last song you wrote? You could play them that. You don't want to get in, if you're sitting around a fire, you don't want to get to the bridge and go, and then the bridge goes, and then, and sort of mime your way through it. You got to have something there, or else it's not really a song yet. That was something that became really clear to both of us, was like, we kept saying, oh, we have all these songs. And then I was like, okay, well, play me one of your songs, Tim. And he was like, oh, well, I don't have a verse. And I'm like, okay, well, let's not call them songs until we can sing them. Right. So in any case, this discipline was really fun, and it really gave structure to each week. Like we worked at it like we would a job, or what we would perceive an office job to be like, And by the middle of March, we had whatever that would be, like 20 some songs. We just kept going. And one of the things we committed to was like, let's not quite think about records yet. Let's just amass a pile of songs. If we're really songwriters, then let's write songs. Yeah. And so that was kind of what led into the recording of this record. And once we had enough and we had like sort of figured out what my output was going to be, there were all these songs that Tim had started and then we finished that became a record that we're going to make for him too. So cool. It was really fruitful and really fun and really helped take some of the existential pressure off of the year, Yeah. There's so much that's out of our control. And this was something we could work at and feel good about. And it alleviated a lot of that anxiety.
Yeah. And so that album is called Blood Harmony. It's out October 22nd. Yeah. We do have today, when the podcast is getting released, this Friday, what is that, the 20th, we're going to have a new single, Surfboard, that comes out. You already released Sandy Sheets. Could you have written, and I've listened to the full album a few times now, I really, really like it. Thanks, man. Could you have written that album had the last year not happened? Like what you're talking about, Pencils Down Friday, it's time with the family, not being pulled around from show to show. Was it kind of a perfect storm to be able to write that? And then I didn't know this going into this, but the kind of bonus of having enough material for Tim's album as well on top of that.
I think that, I think that that's kind of true for any album, because what you're doing is like taking snapshots of where you're at in life at that point. And so sometimes you make albums and they're a little bit scattered because you're scattered. And you're getting your ideas from all over the place, and you're touring too much, or you're doing, maybe you're working a job that's pulling you away from that discipline or whatever. And I think sometimes that makes for great albums and peculiar choices. And sometimes it pulls away from a centralized theme. I mean, there are a bunch of ways that it all kind of comes together. But I think for this Blood Harmony, I do think that all that time that I spent with my children and then longing to be with my sisters and my brother and my dad, who are they all live in Philadelphia or near, and I couldn't see them. And so I was reestablishing sort of what my priorities were here at home, and then really just wishing to see people that I loved and the most precious people to me. So that's sort of how a lot of the themes emerged that ended up being covered on the record. So yeah, I guess my answer is that no, without the year being what it was, I don't think we would have ended up with Blood Harmony, but I do think that's kind of true for every record. Right. I think that it always, whatever you're choosing to do while you're writing songs does impact how you write and how that thing gets delivered.
Yeah. We'll get into the two singles I just mentioned. But I can feel that there's a sense on the album of, is nostalgia the right term, or longing to be in a different place? And maybe that parlays into a bit of the first single, which is Sandy Sheets. But, as a moment in time, thinking about all the things that happened the last year, like you said, you're writing an album based on what's around you, whether it was last year in the pandemic or 5 years ago with some other event in your life. Mm-hmm. Does that shape the actual songs that are on the album, you think? Like the feelings that you had?
You're the first person to point that out, actually. And I do think there's probably longing. I don't know if it's nostalgia. In places it is. For instance, on Sandy Sheets. But then there's also songs that are forward looking, like, well, how am I going to live with my children, and how am I going to navigate the current waters we're in? And so that's forward looking. But I think if you're looking forward or back, there's longing either way.
Right.
So I think longing might be a good way to describe some of the feeling that's going into it. And I guess that makes a lot of sense because our current moment was so paused. Yeah. It was so uncertain. And I think, even as we reemerge, it's been interesting to have conversations with people because I haven't seen people in so long. And then so you're hanging out and you're like, well, what's been going on? Which is a natural thing to ask socially, but then it doesn't take long to figure out, well, nothing's been going on. We've all been in this purgatory, whether it's old friends in Germany or my family in Philly or wherever, it's bizarre. So I think that longing, forward or back, is probably all over that record, and I didn't even realize it till you just said it. So that's interesting.
If you want to put a tagline out, this is my longing record, I'm happy to take the credit for that.
That's fine, man. Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's some of the fun when you're able to do the interviews on a record. Some of the fun is having other people's perspective show you kind of what you were up to, because a lot of it you're just sort of in the river looking for fish, it's hard sometimes to realize what you came up with because you're so immersed in it, you're so close to it.
Right. So before the show kicked off, we were talking about how you view yourself as, and I don't want you to have to speak for your brother as well, but how you view yourself as a songwriter, which is a lot of the folk heritage in it, if you will, where you're writing songs about moments in time, events, the way that you write, probably with an acoustic guitar. But then what you're talking through is, okay, when I get on stage with the Falcon or Mermaid or whatever it might be, people don't see that. They see the energy shows up. They see, maybe I'm opening for another band, maybe you're headlining your own show, but they don't see the folkier side, so to speak. Was that a challenge for you to say, like, hey, I want to show people this is a thing that I want to do, or is it just this is what you want to write now? And there's no, obviously it's your product that you're putting out and your creative, vision there. But is it almost a little bit like, I really want to put out an album like this so people can understand, like, this is the kind of music that I like to play, this is what I like to listen to, or is it just happenstance now that this is kind of where you've headed with the last few releases?
No, I mean, I think that what happened was I made my first solo record, and it was a departure from what the Loved Ones, which was my primary songwriting vehicle initially. Right. And that was more of a departure that had more folk oriented arrangements and instruments and so on. I got the opportunity to make my second record, Devour, in like a legendary studio in Los Angeles with these incredible players. And it felt like I got an opportunity to steer the Millennium Falcon or something, like I had guys from My Morning Jacket and Social Distortion and all this, all these incredible players, and the studio itself, there was an old Neve console. And so I just went for broke in terms of recording it that way. And, but I guess it wasn't recorded in a folk way. It was written that way. And then I think some time passed and I made 2 more records. I made Bury Me in Philly with some guys who had, particularly Eric Bazillion, who's from that band, The Hooters, and he had a hit with What If God Was One of Us and all this kind of stuff. They're rock guys too, he and his team. And so it was fun to make that record, and it's something I think I do well at. But I have been wanting to push more in the direction of I guess rootsier sounding music. Like for me, one of the guiding lights is Tom Petty, who comes from a folk and rock and roll. For me, it's about the meeting of folk and rock and roll. I think that's like a sweet spot sonically. But then the last record I made, Tim and I wrote these songs, and it was sort of in response to one of the darkest times in American history that I've lived through. And so it felt like the songs were pointed. And so we took a pointed approach to the music. But over time, when you look back at a 10-year span of making records and playing shows, I started to realize, like, well, people in the folk or Americana or whatever you want to call that world are unaware of what I'm doing because I'm not doing that. I think of myself that way because that's how I pen the song, with a piano or with a guitar. And Tim, my brother, and I, we often tour as a duo, but usually those are in smaller markets. Those are in places like we don't do as well, so we don't bring a band. So not as many people, like people in my hometown in Philadelphia, haven't seen Tim and I play in a sort of more
as
folk.
a duo.
Yeah, and that's where that clicks a lot of times for people.
Right.
So it's an interesting thing. And my manager pointed this out. He was like, one of the reasons people don't think of you that way is because you don't present yourself that way. And I was like, oh, he's right. So I think when I had what I thought was this sort of screwy idea in doing the Patty thing, he jumped on it. He was like, this is a great idea. You're one of the only people who holds Patty Griffin and Patty Costello, Dillinger 4 and Patty Griffin as 2 of your biggest influences. That's a bizarre and unique thing.
That like, those Venn diagrams, probably, it's like a sliver in the middle. There's probably like 4 other people globally who have the same influences. They don't realize that they could be related.
Right.
Because I think what you did on that double EP, which you did turn into a double LP or a double-sided LP, you connected sonically those 2 artists. That you could say, well, you would never hear that if you go listen to Dillinger 4 and then you go listen to Patty Griffin. Like, there's no link, right? Like,
right.
So
for most people, there isn't a link.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm the link, and that's the thing I kind of decided to take on and claim, for better or for worse, is like, well, that's what I do. I'm somewhere in the middle of those 2 things. I'm trying to make compelling lyrics that are emotionally, I don't know, like that cut to the emotional core of whatever it is I'm talking about. And I like to do them simply. And both of those songwriters are experts at making them simple. One of them sells their product, so to speak, to people in Central Park, and they're seated and they have like a wine in their hand or whatever. And the other one sells them to people with a PBR in hand and they're jumping around. But the thing that was compelling to me about both of those artists is the same. I would hear their songs and be like, oh my God. Like, I don't care about jumping around in a mosh pit with a PBR, just like I don't care about having a wine spritzer seated in Central Park. Neither of those things are why I'm there. I'm there because there's some emotional weight to what those songwriters do. and it's what my fuel is as a human. And so I just thought, but I didn't really think about all this initially. I just was sort of trying to hack through how to record at home and something compelling to do. I didn't have songs yet for the record. And, my brother Tim and I this was another way for us to communicate. Well, he's at home with the same equipment I am. We can't see each other. This is the first time it's been 6 or 8 months we haven't hung out. And so it was like, well, let me work on this cover and send you the audio, and then you put your harmonies on it. And we sent it back. And it was really just that was initially what was happening. And then all those other like layers that we're talking about now, I think just became clear over time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think with Blood Harmony, it is a concerted effort to have the songs played unflinchingly the way that they sounded in my head. And I think in other instances on other records I've made, the tendency was maybe more to go, all right, well, let's rock. I don't exactly know what else to do here. And maybe the producers or the people involved and that even happened on Blood Harmony, oddly enough. I'm surrounded by all these wonderful players in Nashville. And I brought those songs to them, and 5 or 6 of them were finger picked and quiet. And when the band sort of got a hold of when we were all in there was a push towards rock.
Yeah.
And there were instances where I was like, no, absolutely not. And then the middle ground came at different points. And then there were other points where I just said, okay, I'm yielding to this. You guys are making this song Snow Globe sound like Soundgarden. And I fucking love Soundgarden. So let's just go with it. But they, Tom Bukovac, who's like this incredible session guitar player in Nashville, probably the most hotshot player in Nashville.
Yep.
He heard me sing at one point and he was like, man, why aren't we making this thing high octane? And it was a reminder, like, this is probably what producers or players that I've played with in the past probably heard too.
Right.
And so I made a concerted effort to be like, look, I know I can do that. And I've done that on other records, but on this record, there's a specific thing I'm going for. Yeah. And it's more restraint and it's more song forward. It's more, sometimes what people will hear is just this guy belting and not necessarily what I want to get across in that particular instance, which is, here's this lyric and I really want this idea to come across as a haunting lyric. Yeah. Let's not scream this one, or let's not sing this one in, at the high end of the E,
it's choosing the moment,
or where it's like higher up in the register. So that was interesting, and it's been an interesting thing. And for me, this is truer to the artistic impulse than some of the last couple records, just because I had the tools to realize all of the stuff that was going through my head instead of some.
Yeah, and I think going in when I listened to the album, actually I had started with the singles that I knew were going to come out first. So I had started there, and then I listened to the full album all the way through. You can hear that now that you say that, when there's some that you meet in the middle ground, some you're like, no, let's keep this a little bit more how it was written originally. I hear that Leave It in That Dream as an example, like
totally.
That's, you just left that probably where it was or close to it, right? Obviously added some other layers to it, but and then which will lead into the first single that we're talking about, which is Sandy Sheets, where you let yourself, you don't go fully back to maybe getting comfortable in full rock, but you let yourself kind of go a step further away from especially Leave It in That Dream, right? Like that one further, you got some middle grounds, and then you have the ones that are really mellow. And I think the 2 singles we'll cover today are actually a good example of 2 out of the 3 of those categories. So let's play Sandy Sheets, and we can come back and talk about it a little bit.
Sounds good.
All right, so that was a little bit from Sandy Sheets. Go check out the rest of it. It's out. It's on all the streaming platforms: Spotify, Apple Music, anywhere else, SoundCloud. So, Dave, talk to me a little bit about that song. I think that's a good example of, you had talked a little bit before about the kind of rock singer songwriter, Tom Petty, Springsteen. That lean. I'm actually not a huge fan of saying, "Oh, this sounds like this artist." I think that's really like a shitty way to phrase something. But I think that's in terms of other things that are on the album. That's probably clear what I'm getting at there.
Yeah.
That was the one that sticks out to me when I said nostalgia, and maybe longing is the right term. But put your rear facing cap on for a second and start thinking about, like, where were you when you wrote that song? Like, when you listen to it now, like, what are you picturing in your head? Is it a callback to when you're a teenager in some place like Asbury Park or whatever? But what's the callback for you?
It was actually Ocean City, New Jersey, which is a dry town in southern New Jersey. It's a shore point. It's like a slice out of the 1950s or whatever, for better or for worse. But that's where my parents took me and my sisters and Tim.
For better or for worse?
They would take us there as we were growing up for a week of vacation every year. And so as you go through childhood, it's an hour and a half from Philly. So once I was a teenager and that longing is associated with that. Like, I remember listening to The Cure, and being at the Jersey Shore and listening to Hey Jealousy and all that as that stuff started to come alive. But the writing process for that song was tricky because Tim brought a lyric that was, "You found yourself a ladder to the clouds. You never want to come back down." It was easy. I don't know if he even had "It was easy when it was easy." And so it was a little bit more declarative and a little bit more like, you found this and you're not coming down. It was a little bit more accusatory, I guess. And so we wrote a whole version of a song, around that idea and some of these same melodies. But it was like angry, and it was a bit accusatory of someone who had gone to Los Angeles and drank that Kool-Aid and was trying to be like a successful person, but lost their soul or whatever. And it's an age-old kind of song. We've heard that song. And I liked the melody and I liked that one lyric, but I hated it. We got like all the way done almost. And I was like, I just don't care about this.
It was the wrong vibe.
I don't like it. And I think your melody in that ladder to the clouds is like, could be romantic. And this happened to us on a song on the last record called Fireflies. And it was a little bit more caustic initially, the lyric. And I said, let's just try to write from a romantic perspective. Like, let's write what it was like to go back and get drunk on the golf course where we live and meet girls and fall in love and just be simple. And that ended up being one of the most successful songs on the record, especially live. People really responded to it. And it was just us changing our frame a little bit in the writing to write something that was evocative instead of accusatory. So I found ourselves in a similar situation. I was like, we're accusing and I just don't care. Like, whoever this was that moved to LA, and who cares? Like, let them go to LA and live their dream. I want to write about something that's meaningful to me. And so that's where the sort of the engine turned over on this song. And once we got into that, we just were off to the races and felt really good. And so in terms of how we arranged it and recorded it, I just wanted it to be exactly the feeling that is sort of embodied in the lyric. It's like, well, it kind of sounds like a Cure song. It kind of sounds like an old Gin Blossom song. It's like some meeting of those things musically underpinned the lyric. And so it just felt right, because I think like we hit on some truth in the lyric that felt right to me, where I was like, yeah, this, let me remember you when it was easy is I feel like that's like when you're at your best. When you get older, instead of holding on to the things about a relationship that killed it or made it difficult or cruddy, I think if you can reestablish how you think about it and go like, I just remember her when it was good. Yeah. And I choose to remember it that way. And I don't need to remember how it ended all in flames or something. It just felt like a certain amount of like kindness has to go into that. And it felt good. And it's interesting because some of the comments that I've seen come back, I try to keep a reasonable amount of distance from that, but people have said, this makes me feel good. And I'm like, that's really cool. You know, I know there's plenty of music that's that way for me. That's why I listen mostly just to Tom Petty all the time. I go, let me just put on Tom Petty because I feel good. So if we hit that on that song, then I think mission accomplished. You know?
It's funny because the way that I listen to that song is I like transport myself to a very specific time. Actually, it's funny. Maybe it's the same time frame that you're thinking when you were writing it, but a very specific time in high school. It was my first time ever going to Asbury Park.
Yep.
And I grew up in Connecticut, so like the Jersey Shore was like you'd go to the Jersey Shore, but you'd go with your parents and like you'd sit at the beach all day, but like you wouldn't really go out. Right. So I remember there was a certain point when we all could drive, and we drove down. Yep. We saw a Gaslight Anthem show at the Stone Pony, and like then we walked around the boardwalk and you know, bought beers when we shouldn't have been and all that stuff. Like that's where I get transported to. And
that's the idea. Yeah.
Positive for me, message, right?
For me, they're just a lot older bands because the Gaslight Anthem is it's like those guys are a year or two younger than I am. So they're good friends of mine. But yeah, it's cool that you interfaced with it in that way, because for me, that was it was that driving thing. Like, we can all drive down the shore. This girl's got her license and a car. Okay, let's go.
Let's get the hell out of here.
Yeah, let's go down to the beach. And she's listening to the Gin Blossoms, and you know, and I'm listening to The Cure. And then I put the Bouncing Souls reference in there because anybody in New Jersey should be listening to the Bouncing Souls. Right. But yeah, that was the idea. So I'm so glad that happened for you, because you're talking about a 10 or 15 year difference in terms of when you were doing that. You know, you were doing that to Gaslight Anthem, which means it was in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And for me, I was doing that in the mid 90s or the early 90s, I guess. And it's kind of wild, but there's something about that, you know, going to the beach. It's, you know, it's definitely a Jersey thing, you know. I don't really even think that's true.
But I don't even know. I'm sure people who haven't been to the Jersey Shore have their own thought of,
for sure,
the things that you're talking through. Whether it's a California beach, whether it's, you know, they've just seen the Jersey Shore, and hopefully they're not basing it off of the show The Jersey Shore. Right. But you know, they're basing it off, so maybe they've seen Atlantic City, like any of these kind of things, right? Yeah,
there's a big mythology that Bruce Springsteen has more or less invented about that people like the Souls and Gaslight and I have all, and the Menzingers have all borrowed from. And so I think that, and I think it's real now. Like when you go there, that stamp, it's sort of like fact and fiction have swirled into whatever Asbury Park is now.
Perception has become reality. Really,
right. There. Right. But it's a trip. I mean, I think that all that, you know, albeit they were earlier references, that's what I was feeling. And that's what made me feel something when we wrote that song, was like, you know, thinking about that. It's weird. It's like that summer romance thing where it's really sweet for a little minute, and then it starts to fade right around when you go back to school, or right, you know, a lot of people have experienced that, you know, and that's what the verse that is about to come after we came back from hearing the song. That's the next part, is like, it did sort of turn to fall, the relationship and the weather, you know, it sort of withered away, and that's true, but I want to remember it when it was good, you know, when we were laughing and getting high and falling in love and stuff. So I just think that was kind of where we were at. But again, like, it's so funny to talk about this because I don't know how much of that was conscious. It was more just like Tim and I hit on a feeling, and then the lyrics started to flow. It wasn't like,
Right.
let's try to tap into Jersey, or let's try to, it was more just like, hey, how about this? And it sort of takes its own subconscious shape. And then some of these things you realize later, like, oh, that must be what's going into it.
What's really funny is, and you mentioned The Cure, you mentioned the Gin Blossoms in there. When you say "Hey Jealousy" on repeat in that song,
Mm-hmm.
parallel to you playing, or parallel to listening to Sandy Sheets, in my head somewhere I can also hear like the chorus to "Hey Jealousy" go off. So like,
Oh,
I don't
that's
know,
cool.
maybe you, by just mentioning The Cure and the Gin Blossoms, maybe you just got into a mode with Tim and just, you know, started writing around that, you know, and the sound kind of falls in really to the point that you're getting back to, which is like the sonic side of it is actually secondary on, you know, a lot of these songs to what I'm listening for in the lyrics, because which may be different from earlier, you know, some of your earlier work. Because the entire
Yeah,
time I'm like, where's he going to take us next on this little journey, that like a silhouette for a song.
that's interesting. Yeah, it's funny because at the end of the day, I forget what our other references were. I think there was at one point it was Wild in the Jersey Heat. We had I'm on Fire on repeat.
Yeah,
And you know, because of the obvious Springsteen thing. And then I thought, well, it's maybe too on the nose, although it was true. Like I'm on Fire was a big one. And it's funny because the Bouncing Souls reference would have been later. Like I didn't when I was a teenager, I wasn't listening to the Bouncing Souls. They were still forming or whatever. They're a couple years older than me, but they didn't make True Believers till the early 2000s. But um yeah, it was I can't remember the exact. I think there was a point at which maybe we were making a demo to send to Will, who produced it, Will Hogue, at which we had to make some decisions about what the callbacks were going to be.
right.
And like, okay, well, do we leave the Springsteen reference in there? No, I think we're pretty well already on the Jersey Turnpike here. I don't think we
Yeah.
need to call it out.
Is it too on the nose? Is it almost, oh, because it's a fine line, right? To like walk down and not make it a cliche, right? In you
Well,
don't want it
the
to be.
only, yeah, the hill I was almost willing to die on with that was I'm on Fire is a song about longing and like that sexual energy. And so I thought, well, that really does work, you know, in the same way that Hey Jealousy is like you're jealous when
Right.
you're a young kid of your significant other. Um, but we opted, I knew I wanted it to actually initially just be Just Like Heaven all the way through.
Hmm.
Um, but the first song that came to me was Hey Jealousy because it sort of painted that for whatever. I guess that was really popular in high school for me. I can't remember when that song came out, but the funny thing was the Gin Blossoms got a hold of it and ended up blasting it out on their social media. Like,
Oh,
hey,
your song.
yeah, they got a
Yeah,
hold
that's
of
cool.
Sandy Sheets and like put it on their Facebook and their drummer reached out to me and stuff, which was really a trip. Like I was like, whoa, this is great. It's crazy what a little song can do.
Yeah.
Cause to me, the Gin Blossoms are this giant rock band that I have no
Right. You've come full
reference.
circle, like from what
Yeah, it
you were
was a
listening to
trip.
younger, and now they're helping promote your work.
Yeah, they were thankful of the reference, which I was just stunned by, frankly. So
Yeah,
it was wild.
that's great. So we touched on it briefly. Before we get into the second single I want to talk about,
Mhm.
I do want to talk about that Patty 2 EP release. And we
Okay.
talked about, you know, are you like the only person who has that kind of intersecting, um, you know, influence or inspiration from there? But as you look through it, it's really unique. You know, a couple that stick out to me: "Long Ride Home" on
Yeah.
the TT Patty,
Mhm.
"Double Whiskey Coke No Ice." That's a great one with Lily Hyatt. I mean, were there some obvious ones on there where you were like, I've been playing these songs maybe on your piano or your guitar or whatever it is for a long time, and I just want to tackle them, and I want to bring in, you know, Lily on this one as an example, or whatever it is. Like, what did that look like to say, I'm gonna make these and you're going to strip them down. And actually, in a couple of instances, you're more stripped down than even the Patty Griffin one, like which is I
The
thought
bigger,
unique.
yeah, the bigger challenge was the Patty Griffin side. The Dillinger 4 side was actually, that's the more drastic.
Yeah, big time.
That's the more drastic one because, for instance, Lily Hyatt, her dad is John Hyatt, one of the most celebrated songwriters there are, and he heard Double Whiskey Coke No Ice and said something to the effect of, "Boy, I would listen to the original. That's some racket," you know.
Yeah, totally.
To the great delight of the Dillinger 4 guys. I texted them
Right.
all that, and they thought that was funny. But I think that was easier for me because those are so lyrically dense. And I think, if anything, as much as I love the punk rock energy, I think a lot of times really good lyricists get lost in punk rock because it's kind of too loud and too fast, and people can't process what's happening that fast. So that just seemed like, look, the chords are all pretty simple, the melodies are really strong, and the lyrics are incredible. So if I just strip it all the way back to that and give these songs all the room they need to breathe, no problem. So that came quicker. Patty Griffin has already done a magnificent job of recording these songs in that way with acoustic guitars, beautiful lush arrangements. She's got some of the finest players you can find in the world to play on them. So I tried a few versions of a couple of the songs with like an acoustic guitar or piano, and it just sounded like it was almost silly. It was like, well, you're not as good a singer as Patty Griffin, and she evokes so much with her voice. Like, how are you going to do this? And so Tim, my brother, was like, I think you need to think about yourself when you first went solo, and you were, because I was going out and opening for these giant rock bands with an either acoustic or an electric guitar. And he was like, think about how you would deliver a song with an electric guitar. It was like kind of like Gibson Les Paul Jr. with P90s and a little bit of dirt on the amp. And he was like, and then your voice, sing them that way. And I think maybe you'll unlock something in the song that's unique to you. And once I did that, we sort of had a framework, but it took me a couple tries to figure out like, okay, well, that's too much gain, or that's not enough, or because I have such, she also isn't a friend of mine, whereas the Dillinger 4 guys are old pals,
Right.
And so it felt more like a hill to climb with her because I wanted to, like, I was very reverent. She has a certain emotional power over me. Like, there's a few like singer songwriters that can just open their mouth and I start to cry, and then she's one of them.
Right.
And so I felt like, oh man, this is tough. This is really tough. But once we sort of worked within that frame that Tim described, I felt good. And then we started to ask friends of ours and people that we respected and loved musically to maybe sing on it, and started to like suss out the arrangement a little bit more. But yeah, that was kind of how that came to be.
Yeah. The way that, and I hadn't listened to Long Ride Home in the Patty Griffin's actual version in quite a long time. And I listened to, I think it was yesterday, I listened to both your version and her version back to back. And I have a completely different experience for both of them.
Interesting.
Which is, I like how, so her version is almost bordering on maybe almost a bluegrass, which is the instrument selection towards the end of the song.
Yep,
In
totally.
yours, I don't know if that's like, let's just say roughly halfway through the song where it kind of picks up a bit, in terms of other instruments coming in. Yours turns into a bit more of a rock song, but it's not really, it's like a folk rock song, right? But it's not bordering on bluegrass. So I think you did a really nice job there of dovetailing away from each other. If you had just followed a bit, and maybe this is part of the challenge that you were faced with, but like if you had just followed into bluegrass and like doing the same thing that she kind of did, it probably wouldn't have had the same effect. But I was almost waiting after listening to hers first and then yours. Okay, how's he going to tackle this part of the song? It's a really kind of good juxtaposition there.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I mean, I think that's been a tricky thing just overall in life, is being fascinated with songwriting to the level that I'm fascinated with it. You do listen to a lot of country and bluegrass and folk in order to get to the best songwriters. Right. However, that's really foreign to me. I'm a northerner. Like I'm not a country guy in terms of it would be ridiculous for me to try to sell that. Right. But as much as I love it, I love so many country artists and so many bluegrass and folk singers. I'm a folk singer from Philadelphia, which is about as urban and it's rock music and it's soul music and it's hip hop and it's all very hard hitting. It's a hard hitting place.
Yeah.
And so I think it's been hard for me over the years to determine like what does that really look like for a guy like me. I'm not from Alabama. I'm not from, even going to Nashville and making this record. There were certain things that were suggested that I was like, look, I cannot put that on my record. I can't. In good conscience, I'm just not that guy. I'm not, I can't, I'm not, hey, diddle, the farmer in the Dell guy. Like I'm from Philadelphia. So, and it would just feel inauthentic. Like I love it. And don't get me wrong. I do love all that stuff. I love that so much about the Patty Griffin that she leans into that realm and is able to do that. But it would have been peculiar for me at this stage of my right. artistic development or something to try to shoehorn that in. It just felt it would feel weird. And I think for me, like, and maybe I'll get over that hump. Maybe when I'm older, I'll just say, hey man, I'm perfectly fine with a fiddle. But right now I'm like fiddle, violin. Yeah. Fiddle. No.
Yeah. Well,
fiddles are from Barnes. And I don't know. Said,
you've got history of recording music a certain way, sounding a certain way, right? Maybe the writing hasn't been that different, but just like what's around it.
Yeah, that's right.
Instrumentally. If you had started in that, maybe people wouldn't even think twice. I mean, people thought John Fogerty was from the Bayou in Louisiana for a really long time,
yes,
right? And was writing, all the Born on the Bayou songs and Fortunate Son and all these things during the Vietnam War. So like it can work. But can you imagine if Fogerty transitioned to that halfway through his career? They'd be like, what is this,
Right. So,
yeah,
and that is like sort of the dirty little secret of artistic endeavoring, is that, everybody wants full freedom to be able to create whatever it is they want to create. But if you're working within a commercial space, there are limits, and I think for me, there were too many limits within punk rock. So I sort of had to really push back. However, the spirit of that genre, ironically, is do whatever you want and do it fiercely, kind of. And so that's kind of been my guiding principle. But I do think you can push the audience and pull them along and push them in directions they're not totally comfortable with. But you also have to respect that they're working people who aren't necessarily completely whipped up about your artistic endeavor. They want to hear a song and they want, in other words, they want to come to you for a thing that you're reliably good at. And so it's a weird maelstrom of kind of like keeping those two things at least in the picture when you're making artistic decisions. Now, again, I don't make those decisions writing songs, but I think it's interesting. I sort of made this distinction with my brother because we were sequencing the record. So, okay, that means it's written, it's recorded, and now it's time to put the songs in order.
Right.
And he had a sequence that was different from mine, and he had reasons for it that were like really, I forget what it was, but I basically said to him, look, when we're songwriting, we're at the pure river and we're just trying to catch fish, the best fish we can catch. And that's the river, and that's fresh water. The music industry and selling your record and performing and being an entity that makes money and brings people joy through music, that's the ocean. There's sharks out there, and there's seaweed out there, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff. So somewhere in the middle of this process, you're in brackish water. It's where fresh and salt water meet. And that's what sequencing and packaging and to some degree, some of the recording choices are that too. It's like, well, how do I make this as palatable to people who would like to listen to it as it is in my mind, you know? And so again, you don't want to pander, and you don't want to, you know, oh, well, what would people want? That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying, keeping in mind that there are people that potentially will listen to this, I think is a kindness to the audience. I think that's something that my working class upbringing and my like simple folk kind of way of looking at things, it's just in there, you know, like I'm not one of these. I love when Bob Dylan goes out there, but I get why certain people don't. And right. I think, so for me, I try to push and pull. For every Sandy Sheets, there's a weird, bizarre, a song like Prague or something from my first record where it's like, I'm going full on into Tom Waits or Captain Beefheart realm or something.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you're also, the good thing is that I don't think you're on Blood Harmony. You're not straying too far away from a story arc or I shouldn't say a story arc, a feel for the whole thing, right? So you've got something like, we just go through Hanley as an example, which is on there as well. That sound is different than Sandy Sheets, but it's the right vibe for the album, right? Like it all fits together, and I could see why that sequencing is tough, because if you and when you look at the track list, I get kind of what you're going for. You want to bring people up, build them, move them kind of through maybe a certain order or story.
Yeah.
And if you had put those threw those tiles down on a table and then said, all right, go arrange this, I mean, 10 people could have 10 different answers, of how they listen to it and what goes through.
That's how it was, actually.
I can't imagine. That's probably pretty difficult.
Well, my manager, who I trust so deeply, Alex, he had a sequence. Tim had a sequence. I had a sequence. And then the producer, Will Hogue, who's a very trusted, amazing songwriter and killer producer, he had a sequence. And I just had to find the stuff that was common in all of them and then build it out according to my own wants. It was like, again, it was like serving. I said, okay, well, clearly we're all agreed on this. And this would have been like opening with North Star. When I said that in the studio, everyone went, yeah. Because initially we're going to open with Surfboard. But again, the first song on a record is crucial. Like, is the rest of the album representative of Surfboard? Right. Not really. That's a different thing. That's almost like an off the wall one.
It's your reprise in the middle, kind of middle of the album.
Right. So it was interesting to kind of have, like you said, all those tiles, and then like, all right, we'll put this into order and show us what the puzzle is. It was tricky. It was fun though.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, speaking of Surfboard, let's play a little bit from that, which is the second single from the album, out today, Friday, August 20th. So let's take a listen. We'll come back and talk about it.
Sweet.
I'm in. I've been cleaning up my act after a weekend's worth of sin. This past year I got let go, and then the rent got hard to pay. So I'm finding myself kneeling down to pray. I keep them clear and small, little prayers that won't hurt at all. Clear and small, whispered words flow through the wall. Surfboard, 'cause I can't figure out how to not drown in these waves. Dear Lord, I saw your billboard about hell and fire and how I need to be saved. So I'm praying straight away.
All right, so that was a little bit from Surfboard. Go check it out. It's out today. everywhere where you're streaming your music. I love that song. Actually, Dave, I think that's probably as I said, I really like the album. I think that's probably my favorite song on the album. There's just a feeling to it, and then combined with, maybe it was what we were talking about before with the Patty EPs, you gave it a lot of room. You gave the lyrics a lot of room, which I really enjoy throughout. Why don't you just take me through a little bit of your writing process for that one, because there's a lot going on in that song, but even in a more simple arrangement, you're really lyrics, got an acoustic guitar. Maybe the first time you've had is that a mandolin or a violin in there?
Oh, there's a mandolin. It's actually Cowboy Jack's mandolin, the old star, and he owned Sound Emporium where we recorded it. So that's hanging on the wall.
Oh,
so
cool.
we saw that hanging on the wall, and they said, hey, you can play it on any, whenever you want. And so Will, the producer, played it on Surfboard. That song was the first song that I had that I knew would go on the record. So that was like sometime, a couple months into the pandemic, I had this melody kicking around, and I had, I've been finding myself praying, have you seen the shape we're in? Because I after having kids and then being amidst a global pandemic, like, as someone who's straight about as far from their evangelical Christian background as possible, there were definitely times where I found myself praying, and I don't know to who, I don't know for what. I just know that in your bleakest hour, you turn to the things that you know from childhood. Sure. And for me, when reassessing those times when you pray, I did find it funny that I'm always asking for something. Like, I'm not necessarily meeting. If there's a God out there, is he or she or they looking to just fill my wish list? I doubt it. And if they are, I don't think they're looking for that without a pound of flesh. So I found that idea to be funny. Like, oh, sure, you're praying to me now that you have twin boys. I bet you are, And I thought, how would I think about it if I was God, kind of thing? Like, and what if my little songs started asking me for things, or whatever. So I sat down, I had a writing meeting, scheduled with my friend Heather Morgan, who's an amazing songwriter. She's written all kinds of country hits and stuff. And I just threw the idea at her and was like, what do you think? I think this is catchy. Do you want to work on this? And she said, sure. And she sort of acted like a backboard in that session. I was throwing stuff at her. I was like, what about Dear Lord? What rhymes with Lord? I need a surfboard. She was like, that's great. That's great. Why would you need a surfboard? And I was like, because I'm drowning. Yes. And so she was really kind of coaching me along on a few different instances and I was like, is that too silly? She goes, no, I love it. There's John Prine in there or Randy Newman or something. There's a sense of humor, but it's also heavy. You feel like you're drowning and all is to ask God for a surfboard. It's ridiculous because then you're just in the middle of the ocean with a surfboard. You don't even know how to surf. But so she helped me that far. And then we were meant to finish the song or whatever. We just got sidetracked talking on a Zoom. And I brought what I had worked on with her back to Tim. And he was like, hell yeah. And we finished it up. We worked through it and came up with that landlord line. And we had a bunch of other funny little couplets that we clipped. There's big worksheets for each one of these songs where there's tons of lyrics that don't make it. But this one's really fun to sing. It was, we did, while we made the record, I did like a little songwriting round in Nashville with Jim Lauderdale and oh my God, Leslie Satcher. So two of these like luminary Americana artists. And I was like this guy in Adidas, like a couple feet away, covered in tattoos. Like, and they were so nice to me. The crowd was super nice. It was one of the first shows back in like sort of a distance way. And I played Surfboard and they were thrilled. They were so positive about it. And I was like, okay, cool. It's working here, which means it'll probably work. For whoever, because that's a tough crowd. It's like songwriting royalty. But Yeah, I'm proud of that one. That one was fun and simple, and it sort of hews close to like form, like it's really, really formy. It's 1, 4, and 5. There's one minor chord in it. And
What I like is there's a fine line you walk down in that song with humor and comedy. Like comedy could be a lot of different things. And I don't think that's what you're going for here, but humor is captivating, especially on an album where there's other stuff that's maybe heavier, or you're talking about maybe go back to that theme of longing, right? But like when you can do it with a way there's humor, it almost makes the message a little bit more powerful. And you mentioned John Prine, like that's the master who did it.
Leonard Cohen too. He sort of doesn't get enough. I mean, he gets tons of respect, but he doesn't get enough respect for the humor. There's so much funny, so many funny lyrics. My friend Craig Finn is really good at that. The singer for the Hold Steady, the writer for the Hold Steady. He has a lot of humor in there. It's funny because I've been trying to get more humor into my writing for this reason. And I had a friend tell me years ago when we were just hanging out, we probably were drunk or something, but this is before I got sober, but saying, you should integrate more of your sense of humor into your writing. Cause he was laughing at something I was saying. And I was like, man, that's so hard though, because I think you just nailed it. I didn't realize that distinction between humor and comedy. Comedy is like, you're looking for the laugh. You're looking for the punchline, which we deliver in Surfboard at the end. Like there is a bit of that, but we wait till the end on purpose, so as not to kind of taint the rest of the song. Like we threw that in almost like the Police do in some of their songs, where Sting will deviate at the end and give you a little funny bit, but for the most part, it's so lonely, so lonely. But anyway, I think you made a good distinction that I'll probably take away from this interview and go, okay, is this comedy or is this humor? Because this is something I struggle with as a writer, is trying to insert some kind of sense of humor, because I do think it makes the sad sadder, and the compelling more compelling, if you have a sense of humor, because you're integrating the whole experience of humanity, not just I'm gonna write a sad song,
Right. I think there's a difference. There's a difference between trying to get a smirk, out of somebody, and a belly laugh.
That's right.
So like, and if I think Cohen's a great example as well. But if I think of songs that are like that, Newman, that's another great. How many smirks do you have listening to their music, or if you've been to a show or anything like that? And you don't ever typically, unless it's something they say kind of in banter in between songs, you don't have like a belly laugh moment. You have like a, that does suck. And then you kind of like smirk about it, or that is sad and you kind of smirk about it. I always go back to, some of the John Prine stuff, and it's like, because there's humor in it as well, it's relatable.
Yeah.
Because people get sad, and the only thing that they can do is kind of smirk or smile about it sometimes, or there's some kind of event. So I don't know. I think you nailed that on this one, whether it was intentional or not. You're like, okay, well, this works. I don't want to necessarily go down being, Adam Sandler or something like that doing that, but like some other layer to it. So that's why, man. I like it.
I'm glad it worked for you. I mean, I was proud of it and felt like we nailed the thing we set out to do, which, you don't always. It's weird though. I feel like there were other instances in the record and maybe on past records where I get the joke, but wasn't sure if they did. Even in Sandy Sheets, in the second verse, it says, "Your champagne taste, but my budget was beer." Yeah. And I thought that was a smirker, in that it's so base to have this romantic song and say my budget was beer. It's not even like a complete sentence. My budget was beer.
Yeah.
But again, I'm hoping in certain instances that, you're always trying to push to grow as a songwriter and as a writer in general. You know, like I'm sure real writers look at songwriters and like, give me a break. But
give me a break. You wrote 4 verses and a couple choruses. And
you have
there
melody.
for months writing.
Right, you have melody to get by on. But there is economy of wit and economy of verse. I think that we do have to get right. And I think a writer can prattle on for paragraphs and paragraphs about birds or something that we don't have that. We'd have to make
different.
Yeah, very different. But in any case, I do want to get better at it, and I'm trying, and I think I'm taking the craft seriously. I mean, you know, that is a goal, is to try to figure out the sense of humor because you know, the other thing just about life, I think hip hop gets this right more often than they get credit for, you know, that as a genre, is it's funny. There's so many funny lyrics in hip hop, and then also hard hitting, you know, sometimes sad, but I guess my point is just, it's more total when you think about the human experience than sometimes folk or Americana or certainly punk rock. You know, punk rock, some of the best punk rock is when there's humor in there.
Yeah.
And I mean, they sort of take it often to a crass and dopey spot, but yeah, it is something that I'm trying to work towards. It is fun to have a sense of humor about songwriting.
Yeah. And this one, I know we just talked about, you know, you wouldn't feel authentic if you went full bluegrass, but there is like, maybe it's just throwing in the mandolin in this song. Maybe it's because you really only did that a couple times on the album, where it does feel more stripped down, that it feels authentic. I think if you did a full album out of nowhere that was filled with mandolin or something like that, maybe that'd be tougher to get the vibe right on the album. So I think it fits here in that case.
Yeah, I you should have heard what we didn't leave in. Because we did have Nashville players, and they were like hooting and hollering and showing off their bluegrass chops, and maybe there'll be like a B version that we release later where we show some of that off. But it was funny. There was a point in this song where we came back in for playback, and everybody was, "Hey man, this sounds great!" And I was looking at Tim like, we can't have that guitar lick stay in. Like, there's no way. So this was actually one of those instances where I was like, okay, let's cool it with all this bluegrass. I think we're tainting the waters. And so too much, you know, because it's going to sound like I'm putting on a 10-gallon hat. Whereas where we landed, I think, has nods to it, but it's still just all about the song. And so it was interesting to sort of see in another instance where you're with these incredible players in Nashville, and you can see the tendency to overdress the mannequin, overdress the song in the bluegrass realm. Whereas I'm used to seeing that in punk, where it's like, let's play it too fast or too hard. These guys were trying to make it too boots and spurs or whatever. And I was like, whoa, hold on. Tom Petty, you know, simple, clear. And if we start all this crazy, you know, what's next? The banjo, and then suddenly it's pulling the ear away from the point of the song, which is, for me, was the lyric and the melody. So it's an interesting thing to keep learning, is try to keep it simple.
Yeah, why does Tom Petty work? Is it necessarily just about his sound? I mean, he's probably the best chorus writer of all time, right? So like, that's what works. He could have been doing it with just an acoustic guitar. He could have been doing it. He would have been ahead of his time probably, but in a punk rock band, you know, like, it's just what he happened to sound like, you know, it is really all about the choruses that he was writing. Which is like amazing. So what's next for you, Dave? We obviously have the new album coming out in October. I saw you announce a tour for next year, but what are we looking forward to?
We're doing all kinds of stuff. We're basically, we got an opportunity to open for the Avett Brothers in Philadelphia for their big show. We have some of our own like listening room kind of shows, which are mostly sold out at this point for the fall. There's a couple. We're going to announce maybe a few more. we're going to play some record stores because this is our record label. So we're more than willing to go into a record store and promote our family business.
That's
so we're going to
cool.
do some of that. And then all the principal touring, like the proper club touring and stuff, we held off till next year so people could sort of get the record, fall in love, share it with a friend, and then hopefully bring them out to our shows in Europe in January and February. And then we're going to do American touring after that. So all that's still set to announce and not exactly sure when or what. We are at the mercy of nature and pandemics and all that stuff. So hopefully we can do all this stuff safely. But it looks like that's going to happen. And it looks like the first couple things in September are still on the schedule. And so it's record stores, listening rooms, and then a giant show with the Ava Brothers. So
no, that's great.
Mixed bag of
You'll get to do a full change of you'll get to do probably the duo with your brother at some of those. You'll probably do full
that's all
band.
Duo. Yeah, it's all duo until full band on the club touring next year. So it kind of gives people a preview of what we've made and what we've been up to. And then hopefully there's enough excitement that the club tours are working. And in fact, I just got word about the European tour that it's selling well, which means we'll have people to play to. The most important thing. So it's great, man. It's great to be able to get back to work. It's great to be able to work with people I love and trust, and hopefully make my family and friends proud that we get to do this.
Yeah, that's great. And your vinyl version of Blood Harmony, I think you're already taking pre-orders for it.
We are. We're taking pre-orders for it, and it is hopefully, because we're running the record label, we wanted to do things differently. We wanted the people who pre-order the record to get it before release day.
Nice.
Which is the inverse of what's been happening across the industry. So that's not a promise, but it's our solemn. We're promising to try to get everybody their record before release day that pre-orders it, so you get a treat instead of you have to wait the longest. That doesn't seem fair. So that's our kind of mode of operating. It's been really fun to delve into that and try to create our little world the way we want it to look, instead of having it dictated to you by another company. As much as I appreciate anybody's support, it's at my age and with my family and stuff, I kind of want to full control over as much as I can have, and just so things get done with like the proper touch.
Yeah, no, it's probably very different now, especially because you're not supporting with a tour immediately, right? Or you've got some stuff on the horizon, but the past year has been so different compared to the rest of your career, I'm sure.
It's wild, man, but it's all been good, and I'm just happy to get to keep making up songs and playing them for people. That's just the thing I wanted to do when I was a kid, and we get to do it. So I still pinch myself sometimes.
Wow. Well, thanks for coming on the show. I had a blast talking to you.
I did too, man. I'll probably I got a lot of nuggets out of this. I got a lot of interesting good. Insights on my work, and then just how to move forward. So thank you.
Good. Thanks for coming on the show. We'll keep an eye out. We'll keep telling people, hey, when the new singles come out, and get the pre-order link and all that in the description for the show as well. So please check that out. Dave, you've been wonderful. Thanks, let Sandy Sheets take us out and the show.
All right. See you, Nick.
Catch you on the next one, guys.
Lightning over dark summer clouds. You can smell the rain before it comes down. Watch your eyes glow, zoning out at the lake shore. Your champagne taste, but my budget